My daughter looked me dead in the eye across that table and said it loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. He's not my real dad, so I'm not paying for him. The words hit like a physical thing, something solid and sharp that lodged itself right in my chest. Everyone at the table laughed. That was the thing that got to me most. Not her saying it, not even the cruelty in her voice. It was that everyone laughed. Her mother's new husband chuckled. Her cousins grinned. Even the waiter seemed to suppress a smile as he moved past our table, and I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there with my wine glass in my hand, not drinking it, not moving it, just holding it like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to my chair. The waiter came back maybe 5 minutes later with the check. He set it down in front of me and said in that practiced apologetic tone that waiters use when they're caught between civility and their job, "Absolutely. Her reservation is under your membership account, sir. Her card is declined. Will you be covering her guests?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. At the woman who spent the first 15 years of her life calling me Dad every single day. Who used to run to meet me at the door when I came home from work. Who fell asleep on my chest during movies and woke up confused about where she was. I looked at her and I said, "No, he's not her real dad. Remember." I saw her face change. Just for a second, the confidence cracked. But then it hardened again and she looked away. Let me go back. Let me explain how we got here, because this didn't happen overnight. This was built over years, one small rejection at a time, until it added up to something big enough to say out loud in front of 30 strangers. Her name is Sarah, and she's 28 now. I met her mother, Jennifer, when Sarah was 3 years old. I was 32, Jennifer was 30, and we met at a coffee shop. It was stupid and cliched, the kind of meet-cute that you don't really believe happens in real life until it does. She was standing in line arguing with the barista about foam, and I was amused by her passion about such a small thing. I made a joke. She laughed. We exchanged numbers. That was 16 years ago. For the first 6 months, we kept things simple, just the two of us. Jennifer was careful about introducing me to Sarah because she didn't want her confused, didn't want Sarah getting attached to someone who might disappear. I understood that. I respected it. But after 6 months, after I'd made it clear I wasn't going anywhere, Jennifer brought me over to the house. That's when I met Sarah properly, not just in passing. She was 3.5, with her mother's dark hair and these wide eyes that seemed to take in everything. She was shy that first time, hiding behind Jennifer's leg, peeking out to look at me. I didn't push. I just sat on the floor and started playing with the toys that were scattered around the living room. There was a plastic garage toy and some wooden blocks and a stuffed animal that had seen better days. I made engine sounds with the toy car. I knocked over the blocks and pretended to be shocked. I gave the stuffed animal a voice and made it talk in a ridiculous high-pitched tone. After about 20 minutes, she came over and handed me a plastic block. That was it. That was the moment. That small gesture, a 3-year-old girl offering to share her toy with a strange man in her house, broke something open in me. I hadn't planned on it. I hadn't planned on any of this. But in that moment, I knew I wanted to be part of her life. I wanted it badly. I wanted to be the person she turned to when she was scared. I wanted to be the voice she called for in the dark. I wanted to be trusted completely and absolutely. Jennifer and I got more serious after that. We moved in together when Sarah was 4. I proposed when she was 5. We got married when she was 6. I was there for all of it. I was there the night Sarah got the flu and threw up all over my favourite shirt and didn't apologise because she felt too sick to think about anything but her own misery. I sat up with her all night, holding a cold cloth to her forehead, feeling her fever cool down as the medication kicked in. I was there for the first day of school, walking her to the classroom door even though the teacher said she'd be fine, making sure she knew I was right outside if she needed me. I was there for every birthday, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. And somewhere along the way, she started calling me Dad. I didn't make her do it. Jennifer didn't push it. One day, after about 1.5 years of me being in her life, Sarah just did it. We were at the park and she fell off the monkey bars. She scraped her knee pretty badly and she was crying and she looked around and she said, "Dad, it hurts." Dad, pick me up. It was the first time I felt like I won the lottery. My heart stopped and then restarted. I picked her up and carried her to the nearest bathroom to clean the wound, and she never stopped calling me that. From that moment on, I was Dad. Not Mark, not her mum's boyfriend. Dad. She'd find me in the morning when she woke up and call out, "Dad, I'm awake," as if I'd been waiting for that signal. She'd come home from kindergarten and ask, "Dad, did you miss me?" as if I hadn't thought about her every single minute I was away from her. She'd climb into my lap at night and say, "Dad, tell me a story." And I would make up elaborate tales about princesses and dragons and magical forests just to keep her there with me a little longer. I never legally adopted her, not because I didn't want to, but because I kept waiting for the right time and then time just kept passing. When she was 8, I brought it up with Jennifer. "What do you think about me formally adopting Sarah?" "Making it official?" Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "Her biological father might object," she said. "He's never been involved. He doesn't pay child support. He doesn't call on her birthday. But technically, he could make a custody claim if we do the adoption paperwork. So we didn't. We waited. And then we kept waiting because Sarah's biological father eventually did object, even though he had no right to. He'd heard through the grapevine that I was going to adopt her, and suddenly he wanted visitation rights, even though we'd been invisible for 8 years. The legal thing got messy. Jennifer's lawyer said that fighting him would cost more than we had, and that he might be able to delay things for years, so we gave up. I was still her dad in every way that mattered except legally, except on paper, except in the eyes of the law, except when it came time for her to decide whether I really was her father, or if there was something else underneath it all, something that DNA might be able to claim back. For years, that was fine. Years and years of it being fine. I helped her with homework at the kitchen table, her little legs swinging because they didn't reach the floor. I drove her to school in the mornings and picked her up in the afternoons, and she'd tell me about her day in great detail, things that seemed monumentally important in that moment. Mrs. Peterson was mean to her, but then gave her a gold star for her art project. Tommy pushed her on the playground but then apologized. She was worried about the spelling test but studied really hard. I coached her soccer team when she was 10, the year she was terrified of the ball, and I spent 3 months helping her build confidence until she scored her first goal and ran straight to the sideline looking for my face in the crowd. I was there. I went to her graduation. I paid for college, every penny of it, worked overtime to make sure she had spending money and didn't have to take out loans. Sarah called me Dad, introduced me as her dad, treated me like her dad. When she was 18, her biological father tried to reconnect. He texted her out of the blue asking if they could get coffee sometime. Sarah ignored him. She didn't tell him about her life. She didn't maintain contact. She showed me the text message and we both laughed about it like it was a joke. Like some stranger texting about coffee could ever be more important than the man who'd been there her whole life. I was her dad. That was the deal. But sometime around when she was 22 or 23, things started to shift. It was gradual. I didn't notice it at first. She still called me Dad, but the tone was different. There was something underneath it now, something resentful maybe. She started spending more time with her biological father. I don't know how it happened exactly. He reached out to her through Facebook and she accepted his request, and then they started messaging. At first, she told me about it. "Dad, my biological father is trying to get in touch." I remember being nervous about how to react. I didn't want to be the guy who tried to keep them apart. I didn't want to be petty or territorial. So I told her it was her choice, and that if she wanted to meet him, I'd support that. She seemed grateful for that. We had coffee that Saturday morning, and I told myself I meant it. They connected on social media. They started meeting up for coffee, and then sometimes dinner. At first I asked about it. "How was your dinner with him?" And she'd tell me little details about what they talked about, safe stuff about her childhood and what he'd missed and why he hadn't been around. I nodded, and I smiled, and I told myself it was good that she was getting to know that side of her family. But inside, I felt something shifting in my chest, like the ground beneath me was becoming less solid. I didn't say anything, because I didn't want to push her away. I figured she was an adult now, and if she wanted to know her biological father, that was her choice. I'd done my job. I'd been the parent. I'd been the one who showed up. He was just the biology. Then she got serious with this guy named David. He was fine. He seemed fine. Nothing about him stood out as particularly good or bad, just medium. He was an accountant. He made decent money. He had a dog. Sarah seemed happy, so I was happy for her. They moved in together after about 8 months of dating. He met my parents and they were nice to him. He became part of family gatherings, and I tried to include him in conversations, tried to make him feel welcome. But I noticed early on that he had this way of responding to things with this slightly superior tone, like he'd seen it all before and found it all mildly amusing. And over the past 2 years, I started to notice that Sarah was different around him. She was trying to impress him in a way that felt desperate. She'd laugh at his jokes a beat too late, like she had to first check his face to see if it was funny. When she talked about her family with him, there was always this awkward moment where she'd say, "my parents," and then immediately clarify which one was her biological parent and which one was me. Like it mattered. Like it needed to be sorted out. Like I needed to be explained. Like our relationship needed a disclaimer. My biological dad and my stepfather was how she started saying it. Not just my parents, but this more complicated version that kept me at a distance. I watched David smile when she did this, like he appreciated her making the distinction clear, like he was glad that she understood the hierarchy. Her mother and I had divorced when Sarah was 21. It wasn't messy, we'd just grown into different people. I didn't blame Jennifer. She wanted to remarry, and I understood that. We had joint custody technically, though by that point Sarah was an adult, and spending time with us was her choice. After the divorce, I think Sarah became confused about the bonds that held everything together. With me and Jennifer not married anymore, was I still her family? That was the question underneath everything. I could feel it. The thing that had held everything together was the marriage, and once that was gone, what was I? I was no longer the man married to her mother. So what was I exactly? A family friend? A stepfather who was no longer stepping anywhere? Someone she owed visits to out of obligation rather than out of love? The birthday dinner reservation was originally for just the two of us. Sarah texted me 3 weeks before her birthday and asked if we could go to this upscale Italian place downtown, the kind of place where you need to make reservations and you dress up a bit. I said yes immediately. I was excited. My daughter wanted to spend her birthday with me. But then, about a week before, she asked if her boyfriend David could come. I said that would be great. Then she asked if her mother and her mother's new husband could come too. I said yes to that as well, even though it made the dinner feel less intimate, less like it was about me and her. But I wanted the day to be what she wanted. That was the deal I'd made with myself a long time ago. When you're a step-parent, you take what you can get. The reservation was under my name and the account had my membership, but I let David pick where everyone sat. He put himself at the head of the table, with Sarah next to him. Jennifer and her new husband sat across from me. I sat at the other end of the table, slightly apart from the action. That should have told me something right there, but I was trying not to read into it. I was trying to stay positive. This was her birthday. This was supposed to be special. We ordered, the wine came. David ordered some expensive bottle and made a whole thing about the vintage year and how it was a perfect expression of whatever terroir means. He swirled it in the glass and described notes of blackberry and leather, and I didn't believe he could actually taste any of that. Jennifer's new husband nodded along appreciatively, playing the game. Sarah smiled up at David like he'd just explained the meaning of life, and I felt something tighten in my chest. I sipped my wine and listened. The food was good. The conversation was fine. There was nothing obviously wrong for the first part of the evening, but there was something underneath it. There was this current of something that I couldn't quite name. It was in the way that David kept touching Sarah's arm, not affectionately but possessively, like he was marking his territory. It was in the way that Sarah kept looking at him for approval, before she laughed at her own jokes, checking his face first to make sure it was okay to be funny. It was in the way that nobody asked me questions about my life or my work or anything that mattered to me. Jennifer didn't ask. Her husband didn't ask. Sarah didn't ask. David certainly didn't ask. I was just sort of there, the guy at the end of the table picking up the check, not quite part of the conversation. When I tried to add something, my comment would land like a stone in water, and everyone would move on. I could feel myself becoming more and more invisible as the evening progressed. And then the waiter came with dessert. A small chocolate cake with 28 candles on it, because that's how nice places do it now. He set it down in front of Sarah, and everyone sang. I sang too, off-key like I always do, because I wanted this to be normal. I wanted this to be a nice birthday dinner. But while we were singing, while everyone was distracted, David leaned over and said something to Sarah. I couldn't hear what it was, but she laughed. And not a genuine laugh. A laugh that came from nerves or from trying to please him or from excitement at whatever he'd said. After the song ended, and Sarah had blown out the candles and everyone was applauding, David raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast, he said, and the table went quiet. Sarah looked like she might be excited. I thought maybe he was going to propose or something, even though that seemed fast, but anything's possible. To Sarah, he said, raising his glass higher, Happy birthday to someone who means the world to me. Happy birthday to someone who I hope will mean even more to me very soon." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She looked so happy. She squeezed his hand. Jennifer leaned over to me and whispered, "I think he might be about to propose." I nodded and tried to smile like I was happy about it, even though something in my stomach had tightened. I watched David lean over to Sarah and tell her something else. She shook her head, but she was still smiling. Then dessert was served. The cake was sliced. We ate and we didn't talk much, and the dinner felt like it was wrapping up. That's when David asked about the bill. "Should we split this? How do you usually handle it?" he asked, looking at me and then at Jennifer's husband. I said, "I'll get it. It's her birthday." Sarah laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who'd just been given permission to do something they'd been wanting to do. "Yeah, actually, Dad, I should tell you something," she said. And the way she said "Dad," with that tiny emphasis on it, made me know something was wrong. "I don't think we should have to pay for him since he's not actually family. You're the one who should pay since, he's your responsibility." She gestured toward me with her wine glass like I was something she'd just noticed in the corner of a room. "He's not my real dad, so I'm not paying for him." And then she laughed, like she'd made a joke, like it was funny. The whole table went quiet for maybe half a second, and then everyone laughed. That's what I remember most. The laughter. Like she'd said something clever and everyone was delighted by her observation. I could see Jennifer struggling not to laugh. Her new husband didn't bother to struggle. David looked genuinely amused, like he found it amusing that his girlfriend would say something so casually cruel about the man who'd raised her. I sat there with my wine glass in my hand, and I felt something inside me just break off and die. It was a small death. Not the kind that kills you all at once, but the kind that accumulates over time until you realize you're not quite the same person you were before. My hands got cold. My throat closed up. I couldn't swallow. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked around the table at all those faces laughing, and I felt completely alone even though I was surrounded by people. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself or explain that I'd been there for every significant moment of her life. I didn't say that I was responsible for her in every way, except legally, that I'd paid for her education and her first apartment and her car insurance. I didn't say that I'd loved her more than I'd loved some people I'd given my own last name to. I didn't say that I'd wiped her tears and held her when she had her heart broken for the first time and given her advice about friendships and college and life. I didn't say that I was the one she called when she was scared in the dark as a little girl. I didn't say any of that because somewhere along the way I'd learned that step-parents don't get to argue. We get to be grateful for scraps. We get to smile and nod and accept that we're not quite real family. We get to love unconditionally and accept rejection conditionally. That's the deal we sign up for when we fall in love with someone else's child. The waiter came back with the check, and when I looked at my daughter, I saw something in her face that I'd never seen before. It was entitlement. It was the casual cruelty of someone who'd taken everything they were given and decided it wasn't enough. It was the look of someone who believed they could say anything, and I would just accept it because that's what step-parents do. We accept. We don't demand. We don't insist on basic respect because we're terrified of being the thing that drives our stepchildren away. And in that moment, something shifted. In that moment when the waiter looked at me and asked if I'd be covering her guests, when my daughter was looking at her boyfriend for approval, and her mother was staring at her plate, I made a choice. I looked at her and I said, "No, he's not her real dad, remember?" Her face went white. David stopped mid-sip of his wine. Jennifer's eyes widened. I'd never done this before. I'd never responded in kind. I'd never used her own cruelty as a weapon back at her. For years and years I'd swallowed it. I'd absorbed it. I'd told myself that this was temporary, that eventually she'd understand, that eventually she'd be grateful. But in that moment, I realized that gratitude might never come. In that moment, I realized that there were consequences for the cruelty you direct at people who've loved you unconditionally. Not big consequences, not visible ones, but the quiet consequences of being called out, of having your own words thrown back at you in front of an audience. She didn't say anything. She couldn't say anything. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I turned my attention to the waiter and said, "You'll need to put her portion on her card, but I can cover the rest." The waiter nodded and moved away. The rest of the dinner was excruciating. Nobody knew what to say. David tried to break the tension with some comment about the wine, but nobody responded. Jennifer looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Sarah stared at her plate, and I sat there and I felt the enormity of what I'd just done. By defending myself, I'd broken some unspoken rule about how step-parents are supposed to behave. I was supposed to take it. I was supposed to let it roll off. I was supposed to be the bigger person. I was supposed to be grateful for scraps. But I wasn't grateful anymore, and I wasn't sure when that had happened or how long I'd been feeling this way without acknowledging it. We all left the restaurant separately. Jennifer went with her new husband. David and Sarah left together, with Sarah not making eye contact with me. I paid the bill. $58 that didn't go toward her portion because she'd been born from someone else's body. $58 as the price of being step-family. $58 as a reminder that no matter how much you give or how much you care, there will always be something between you and them that you can't cross. There will always be blood that matters more than time. There will always be biology that outweighs dedication. I drove home alone and I thought about all the years, all the moments, all the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no, all the times I'd swallowed my pride because the stakes felt so high. I thought about the man in the coffee shop who'd been charmed by Jennifer's passion about foam and who'd said yes to being part of a 3-year-old girl's life without fully understanding what that would cost him. I thought about the promises I'd made to myself back then. I would be the father she deserved. I would show up. I would never leave. I would love her like she was my own. I thought about falling in love with a child who wasn't mine, which is the most beautiful and most dangerous thing a person can do. And I thought about how you never really know when it's going to stop being love and start being something else. You never know when the person you've loved is going to decide that you don't deserve it anymore. You don't get a warning. You don't get a conversation. You just get publicly humiliated in front of strangers. The pain of that realization was different than I expected it to be. It wasn't sharp or sudden. It was dull and settling, like scar tissue forming over a wound that will never fully close. It was the understanding that sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you more than anyone else because they know exactly where to place the knife. They know because you've shown them your vulnerabilities, you've let them see your love. It was the recognition that step-parent love, the kind of love that doesn't come with legal protection or guaranteed reciprocation, is a kind of faith. It's faith that eventually they'll understand. It's faith that your sacrifice will matter. It's faith that the years of showing up will count for something. Faith that blood doesn't matter as much as presence. Faith that time spent is currency enough. But that night, driving home alone with the $58 still in my wallet and my daughter's words still echoing in my head, I wasn't sure anymore that I had faith left. I wasn't sure what I had left at all. The pain of that realization was different than I expected it to be. It wasn't sharp or sudden. It was dull and settling, like scar tissue forming over a wound that will never fully close. It was the understanding that sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you more than anyone else because they know exactly where to place the knife. They know because you've shown them your vulnerabilities. You've let them see your love. But the dinner wasn't over yet. I still had to sit there and pretend that nothing had happened. I still had to participate in the rest of the evening as if my daughter hadn't just publicly rejected me in front of strangers. That's what step-parents do. We absorb. We smile. We pretend that the blade didn't go as deep as we know it did. We become experts at compartmentalization, at the art of swallowing your own hurt so that everyone else can be comfortable. We learn early on that our pain is always secondary. Our feelings are always inconvenient. Our needs come last, if they come at all. Sarah was already moving on, already laughing about something David said, already back to being the woman she was before the words came out of her mouth. It was like she'd flipped a switch. One moment she was cruel, and the next moment she was charming again, as if cruelty was just a joke we could all laugh about. Like the words had already left her body, and so they no longer belonged to her. Like she could disown them by pretending they never happened, by acting like that whole moment was just something we'd all imagined. But her mother wasn't laughing as hard anymore. I could see Jennifer watching me from across the table, and there was something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or sympathy. Or maybe just the awareness that something had shifted and she didn't know how to shift it back. I didn't want either of those things. I wanted to not be there at all. I wanted to be anywhere else, doing anything else, with anyone else. I wanted to be the kind of person who could just get up and leave. But I wasn't that person. I'd never been that person. David kept talking. Something about his job, about the market, about some investment opportunity he was looking at. His voice had this smooth quality to it, like honey poured over gravel, slick and unpleasant at the same time. The kind of voice that could convince people of things they didn't believe. The kind of voice that made you want to trust him even when something in your gut was telling you not to. And Sarah was nodding along, engaging with him, asking follow-up questions, doing that thing where she made him feel like the most important person in the room. I'd seen her do this 1,000 times before with different boyfriends. It was her way of staying safe, of managing the situation, of making sure she had the approval of the person next to her before she did anything else. That's what she'd learned from watching her mother. That's what I'd never taught her, because I'd been too busy trying to be the good guy, the one who didn't demand approval, the one who just loved her unconditionally no matter what she did. The waiter brought water, he brought more wine, he asked if anyone wanted coffee. Through it all, I sat at my end of the table and I watched my daughter and I felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Like I was outside of it looking in, like this was happening to someone else and I was just observing it from a safe distance. It didn't feel real. It felt like maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing. Maybe she hadn't actually said those words. Maybe I was misremembering. Maybe the words had been different and my brain had twisted them into something worse. Maybe I'd been too sensitive about it, too fragile, too willing to interpret cruelty as cruelty when she meant it as humour. But then I'd catch her laughing at something and not looking at me, and I'd know it was real. I'd know that she'd meant it with every fibre of her being. I'd know that the words had come from somewhere true inside her, somewhere that held a resentment I'd never fully understood. I thought about the day she was born. Not her birth exactly, because I wasn't there for that. Jennifer gave birth to her with a man I'd never met, a man who disappeared from her life before Sarah even learned to walk. But the day she came into my life, when Jennifer brought her to my apartment to show me, that was the day Sarah was truly born to me. She was 3.5 years old, and she didn't know who I was, and she didn't know that I was going to be the person who showed up for every single thing that mattered. She didn't know that I was going to be the one in the audience at her school plays, the one cheering at her soccer games, the one waiting up when she had her first heartbreak at 15. She didn't know any of that. She just saw a strange man in her mother's apartment and she hid behind Jennifer's legs. And I loved her anyway. I loved her immediately and completely, and without condition. Jennifer's new husband, whose name I could never quite remember, was talking about golf. He was talking about his handicap and the courses he liked to play, and how he'd gotten 3 holes in one in the past 5 years. I don't think anyone cared. I don't think anyone was really listening. But he talked anyway, filling the space with his voice, doing what men do at dinner tables when there's tension they don't want to acknowledge. They talk about hobbies. They talk about work. They talk about anything that isn't the thing that everyone's thinking about. Anything to avoid the actual conversation that needs to happen. The one about betrayal and cruelty, and the way that sometimes the people closest to us surprise us with how much they're willing to hurt us for the sake of a joke. The dessert plates had been cleared by the time I realised that the evening was actually ending. It had gone on for hours and somehow only minutes. Time had become elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that didn't make sense. I was exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. I was exhausted in a way that nothing would fix. The kind of exhaustion that comes from holding yourself together in front of people when inside you're falling apart. The kind that accumulates in your bones. I was exhausted in the way that only deep emotional pain can make you exhausted. The kind that makes your limbs feel heavy and your chest feel tight and your head feel like it's full of cotton. I'd given everything I had to trying to be the right kind of stepfather, and it had turned out that being the right kind meant being the kind that could be publicly humiliated without defending yourself. It meant accepting cruelty as the price of entry into someone else's family. It meant sacrificing your own dignity for the sake of keeping peace. I started doing that thing that people do when they know they're about to cry in public. I started thinking about other things. I started making mental lists of things I needed to do the next day. Buy milk, pay the electric bill, call the plumber about the leak in the basement, fix the fence in the backyard that had been broken since the storm last month. Anything to keep my mind off the fact that my daughter had just told me, in front of 30 people, that I didn't matter, in front of strangers, in front of the waiter, in front of her mother and her mother's new husband, in front of David, the man she was trying to impress with her cruelty, as if being mean to me would somehow make her more attractive to him, as if cutting me down would elevate her in his eyes. But the thing about trying not to think about something is that it doesn't work. It never works. The harder you try not to think about the knife, the more you think about where it went in. The harder you try not to think about the words, the louder they get in your head. She's not my real dad. She's not my real dad. Like that was some sort of magical phrase that could erase 16 years of showing up and paying attention and loving her. Like biology was the only thing that mattered in the end. Like all the time we'd spent together, all the moments we'd shared, all the love I'd given her could be negated by a simple fact about who had fathered her. So I sat there and I let myself feel it. I let myself feel the anger that was building underneath the sadness. I let myself feel the resentment that had been accumulating over months, maybe years, of small rejections and reminders that I would never be quite good enough, that I would always be the stepfather, the one who wasn't biological, the one who was optional, the one who was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of love and attention were thrown my way. I let myself feel the weight of all those moments when she'd clarified which parent she was talking about, when she'd made sure everyone knew there was a hierarchy. Dad and her biological dad, Mark and her real dad, the man who raised her and the man who gave her his DNA. I realized in that moment that I had been waiting for something. I had been waiting for her to become an adult and understand what I'd done for her. I had been waiting for her to look at me and really see me. I'd been waiting for her to say thank you, to acknowledge the sacrifice, to recognize that love isn't measured by blood but by presence. I had been waiting for her to choose me, even if choosing me meant choosing me over the person who'd given her DNA. I'd been waiting for some moment of clarity where she would understand that a father is not someone who shows up at conception. A father is someone who shows up every single day. Someone who teaches you how to ride a bike and helps you with your homework and sits with you when you're sick and goes to all your recitals and school plays and soccer games. A father is someone who loves you even when you disappoint him. But she wasn't going to do any of those things. That realization hit me like a wave, knocked the air out of me, made it hard to breathe. She wasn't going to wake up one day and suddenly appreciate me. She wasn't going to have some big moment where she realized that blood doesn't matter. She was going to keep pushing, keep finding new ways to remind me that I was on the outside of something I'd thought I was on the inside of. She was going to keep hurting me because she knew I'd take it. Because I'd always taken it. Because I'd taught her that loving someone meant accepting whatever they threw at you without complaint. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. It was small at first. Just a tiny adjustment in the way I was holding myself. A slight change in the way I was breathing. A small hardening of something that had been soft. It was the moment when I decided that maybe I didn't have to keep taking it. Maybe I didn't have to be the big person anymore. Maybe I didn't have to accept the cruelty just because she was my daughter, or my stepdaughter, or whatever I was supposed to be to her. Maybe there were limits to what even a step-parent had to accept. Maybe love, real love, required some level of basic respect, and maybe I was finally ready to demand it. The waiter came back with the check. He set it down in front of me like he'd been instructed, and he said in that careful voice that restaurant workers use when they've picked up on the tension in a room, "Your reservation, sir. Will there be anything else?" I looked at the check and I looked at Sarah and I looked at David, who was now checking his phone like the evening had already ended for him. I looked at Jennifer, who was staring at her napkin. I looked at the man whose name I could never remember. I looked at all of them and I felt something cold move through my chest. The waiter was waiting for an answer. He was waiting for me to say whether I'd be covering everyone's meals. That was the question underneath everything, wasn't it? Whether I'd be covering them, whether I'd be paying, whether I'd be providing, whether I'd be taking care of them the way I always had. And that's when I made my choice. That's when I decided that the rulebook was being rewritten, effective immediately. I looked at the waiter and I said, "Her card. Put her portion on her card." He looked confused. He looked at Sarah. He looked back at me. "Her card is declined, sir. It came back declined. That's why I'm asking you." I felt Sarah's eyes on me. I felt David's attention snap back into the room. I felt Jennifer lean forward slightly. Everyone was watching to see what I was going to do. Everyone knew that this was the moment where I was supposed to just pay, where I was supposed to handle it quietly, where I was supposed to protect my daughter from the embarrassment of a declined card, just like I'd been protecting her from everything else her whole life. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at Sarah and I said it quietly, so quietly that she had to lean forward to hear me. I said, "No, he's not her real dad. Remember?" It took her a second to understand what was happening. It took her a second to realize that I'd thrown her own words back at her. And when she did, I watched her face change. I watched the confidence drain out of her. I watched her realize that there were consequences for cruelty, not big consequences, not permanent consequences, but real ones nonetheless. David stood up. He did that thing that men do when they're trying to assert dominance in a situation where they feel like they're losing control. He made a lot of noise about leaving. He made a lot of noise about not having to sit here and be disrespected. He threw money on the table like it was going to fix something, like he was the hero in this situation, like he wasn't the man who'd been smiling while his girlfriend tore into the man who'd raised her. But I barely noticed him. I was watching Sarah. I was watching my daughter realize that I wasn't going to be the person she'd always been able to count on to absorb her cruelty without comment. I was watching her understand, maybe for the first time, that there were limits to what I would accept. Jennifer said, "We should go." She said it quietly, like she understood what had just happened, like she understood that something had broken in that moment that wasn't going to be easy to fix. Her new husband nodded and they both stood up and they left. They just left. No apologies, no explanations. Just a quiet exit from a situation that had gotten too uncomfortable for them to handle. That left me and Sarah alone at the table, with the waiter hovering nearby looking like he wanted to disappear into the wallpaper, and the check sitting between us like a judge's gavel. "Why would you do that?" Sarah asked. Her voice had changed. It wasn't confident anymore. It was small. It was shocked. It was the voice of someone who'd never expected to face consequences for her actions. It was the voice of someone who was suddenly realizing that the world didn't exist only to absorb her cruelty, that people could push back, that I could push back. I didn't answer her right away. I took a sip of my water. I sat with the moment. I let her sit with what she'd done and what I'd done in response. I let her feel the weight of public embarrassment the same way I'd felt it. After a long moment, I said, "Because you needed to understand something. You needed to understand that there are consequences for treating people badly, even your family, especially when it's someone who's been there for you unconditionally." She started to say something, but I held up a hand. I wasn't done. There was more I needed her to hear. "I've been here for you your whole life. I've been there for every single thing that mattered. Every birthday, every school play, every moment when you were scared or sick or confused. I've loved you like you were my own because, in every way that mattered, you were. But somewhere along the way, you started to think that meant you could treat me like I was less than, like I didn't matter, like I was optional, like the years we spent together could be erased by a single comment about biology." "Dad, I didn't mean," she started. "You did mean it," I said. "You meant every word. And I need you to understand that words have power. They hurt people. They change things. And when you say those kinds of words to someone, especially someone who loves you, there are consequences. Tonight, the consequence is that you're going to pay for your portion of this meal. You're going to sit here and feel what it feels like to not be taken care of for once, to have to be responsible for yourself." I stood up and I put on my coat. I left cash for my portion of the bill and for a tip for the waiter who'd been caught in the middle of all this, and I walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Sarah called after me. I didn't turn around. "Home. I'm going home." I heard her scrambling to get her wallet, to figure out what she was going to do. I heard her say something desperate to David, but by then I was already pushing through the glass doors of the restaurant and out into the cold night air. The drive home was quiet. I sat in my car and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for so long. I let myself be angry. I let myself be hurt. I let myself be disappointed in the way that parents get disappointed in their children when they realize that the person they've been trying to raise isn't turning out the way they'd hoped. The disappointment of seeing who they are when you'd hoped they'd be someone different. The disappointment of realizing that all your lessons about kindness and respect and the importance of family didn't stick the way you'd thought they would. But underneath all of that, there was something else. There was a sense of rightness. There was the knowledge that I'd finally done what I should have done a long time ago. I'd stood up for myself. I'd refused to be the doormat. I'd made it clear that there were limits to what I would accept, even from someone I loved. It felt dangerous what I'd done, like I'd crossed some line that I wasn't supposed to cross. But it also felt necessary in a way that scared me, because I realized how much I'd needed to do it. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and I sat on my couch in the dark. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't try to distract myself. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, and I let the weight of the evening settle on me like a blanket. I thought about the years I'd spent trying so hard to be the perfect stepfather. I thought about all the ways I'd compromised myself to make sure Sarah felt secure and loved. I thought about staying quiet when she said hurtful things. I thought about laughing along when jokes were made at my expense. I thought about always being the one who gave and never asked for anything in return. I thought about the moment when that changed, when she started to pull away, when she started to remember that I was optional, and I thought about how long I'd let it end. Her go on before I finally said something. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jennifer. She wrote, "That was too much. You embarrassed her in front of everyone." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond. Let her think what she wanted to think. She was her mother. She would defend her. That's what mothers do. They defend their children even when their children are in the wrong. Even when their children have been cruel. That's the job description. I understood that. I'd never had a biological child, so I'd never had to make that choice. But I understood it. Another text came in a few minutes later. This one was from Sarah. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just trying to be funny." I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time, just to see if the words would somehow feel different with each reading. They didn't. I read it and I understood that she thought an apology would fix things. She thought that saying the words would make it okay, would make me forgive her, would put things back to the way they were before she'd said those horrible things. Like an apology was a magic eraser that could just wipe away the hurt and the humiliation and leave everything clean again. Like she thought I was the kind of person who could just accept a sorry and move on without feeling the weight of what she'd done. But it wouldn't. I knew that even then, in that moment. Because the thing about trust is that once it's broken, it never comes back the same way. You can glue it back together, but the cracks will always be visible. The weak points will always be there, and you'll always be aware that it might break again at any moment. You'll flinch when that person gets close. You'll wonder if they're going to hurt you again. You'll never quite feel safe the way you did before. I didn't respond to her text either. Instead, I sat there in the dark and I thought about what comes next. I thought about whether a relationship can survive this kind of thing. I thought about whether I'd ever be able to look at her the same way again without remembering the way she'd said those words, without hearing the laughter, without feeling the humiliation all over again. I thought about the girl who used to run to meet me at the door when I came home from work, who used to call me Dad like it was the most natural thing in the world, who used to crawl into my lap and fall asleep while I read her stories. And I wondered where she'd gone. I wondered when she'd decided that I wasn't worth holding on to. I wondered if she'd ever loved me the way I loved her, or if I'd just been convenient. Empty. The answer was that she'd grown up. She'd become a woman with her own ideas and her own loyalties and her own way of ranking the people in her life. She'd decided somewhere along the way that I didn't rank as high as I thought I did. She decided that biology mattered more than history, that blood mattered more than time, that DNA was more important than dedication, that there was something fundamental about being related by blood that couldn't be replicated by choosing to be there for someone. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd been naive to think that love could compete with biology. Maybe I'd been foolish to imagine that my presence could outweigh the simple fact of her biological father's DNA running through her veins. And I had to decide whether I could accept that or whether I needed to step back. I had to decide whether I could keep being her stepfather, knowing that I'd never quite be her father. I had to decide whether the love was enough to sustain us both when she didn't think I was worth basic respect. I had to decide if I wanted to keep trying, or if this was the moment to admit defeat and move on to something else, something less painful, something that didn't require me to constantly prove my worth to someone who would never quite believe I was worthy. Those weren't easy questions to answer. They still aren't, if I'm being honest. But at least now I was asking them. At least now I was allowing myself to admit that maybe I deserved better than what she was giving me. Maybe I deserved to be treated with the same kindness and respect that I'd been giving her for so many years. Maybe being a step-parent didn't mean accepting infinite cruelty. Maybe it just meant loving someone, and that was enough. That had to be enough. Because if it wasn't, then I'd wasted 16 years of my life loving someone who would never love me back in the same way. And I wasn't ready to accept that yet. I finished my drink and I sat in the darkness and I waited for my phone to buzz again, knowing it would, but also knowing that this time I might not answer. And when it did, when her name lit up my screen, I let it ring. I let it go to voicemail. I sat with my silence the way she'd sat with my tears at the dinner table. I let her feel, just for a moment, what it was like to be on the other side of rejection. I let her understand that actions have consequences. I let her know, in the only way I could, that I was done playing the role of the patient stepfather who accepted everything without complaint. That chapter of my life was closing. What came next? I didn't know, but I knew I was finally ready to find out.